Maimane, the leader of the One South Africa movement. It was you who actually lodged the first complaint about the president's funders during the CR17 campaign in Parliament. You've heard his answer today. He says that it was 300 million rand, that he doesn't actually know who the funders were. Mmusi Maimane, do you believe him?
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. First and foremost, I think it would be an injustice to suggest that the president only joined the ANC 2 years ago when he was standing as candidate. I think he understood President Zuma's campaign the number of years before that when he was his deputy president. So he knows the culture of campaigning. So his whole notion that he didn't know it was an anomaly, that they needed money for all of these events, etc., to me, I find not credible. Secondly, this whole notion that there was a fire war between him and campaign fund solicitors is a bit extraordinary to me, because how can you, with all integrity, say, I'm going to be the candidate here, it's okay for you to get money from a drug dealer, from wherever you like, just as long as I don't know about it. So if you do illegal activity, it's irrelevant so long as I don't know, because that's fair. Because if we allow the president to keep a culture of, I didn't know, as he said about Bosasa, that I arrived at the center and it wasn't clear that the Guptas, the Watson brothers had funded the ANC and the extent of the rot. I didn't know. The first time I found out about state capture was at the Waterkloof landing. I find it not credible. I think that it's a dereliction of duty for a second in charge, a member of the top six in the ANC, to simply sit back and say, well, it looked like I was reading about it as you in the public were finding out about it. I think is a bit extreme. So I would have wanted more from the president in terms of saying, I, Cyril Ramaphosa, knew 1, 2, 3. These are the actions I wanted to take, and therefore, ultimately, this is the accountability. But instead, we got treated to a whole lot of obfuscation and explanations, as if it was trying to really clarify the ANC's broad position, rather than in fact saying, I as a citizen, as the first citizen of this country, equally so, take this position.
Prince Mashele, does the president, if you look at the political position, did he have any other option than to say what he said today without necessarily giving an explanation that may satisfy Mmusi Maimane about what happened and about why the ANC failed to act on state capture earlier?
Well, there are two things that I did not expect Cyril Ramaphosa to do. Number one, to implicate himself personally by saying that he knew when wrongdoing was taking place, either in his campaign or in the ANC. If he had said that, he would have been pressed very hard by evidence leaders as to what did you do when you knew. Number one. Number two, he knows, he was well advised that if he had said that he knew, that in itself would have constituted a criminal offense in terms of the Prevention of Corruption Act. So he actually was playing a legal game there while charming South Africans. It is not true that he did not know. For example, there was a time when the commission focused on the political committee of the ANC, which was chaired by him, right? And he did actually explain what that committee was established to do, which is to give guidance and supervise the caucus of the ANC in Parliament. And he said that he attended the political committee had meetings almost monthly. So surely, he knew what was going on in the whole ANC as deputy president, but also he knew what was going on in the context of the ANC caucus in Parliament. So I actually don't believe that he did not know, but I understand why he does not admit. It's because he does not want to incriminate himself.
Prince Mashele, Mmusi Maimane, Spoongawa, going to ask you all to stay with us if you don't mind, please. More questions, more coverage of the President's testimony, the second day of testimony at the Zondo Commission coming up. Asking questions, trying to get Parliament to act against state capture. There was a refusal. Was there really any explanation the President could give today?
I think what I felt missing today, which is perhaps maybe what Prince described as charming the nation. I thought if you arrived at a crime of a scene and then you try to not implicate yourself, that's a logical thing. But the question that sits at the table is, what action could you take to deal with that crime? And I thought, instead of being decisive at saying, look, we showed up at the commission and it was our idea in the first place, which is not true. I can recall strongly having to ask President Zuma to initiate the commission, where he simply delayed for months and months on end. I can recall there was a recommendation of the public protector to say that this commission must take place. On Bosasa, when we called for parliamentary oversight committees, the ANC refused to do so. It had to be forced along the way. So instead today, instead of him coming out to say, fine, we accept that here's what the commission will do and here's the work that is going to happen, here's what we're committing to do further on. He talks about all of these processes rather than saying we've committed to the fact that the Hawks must be given better budget to be able to get to the bottom of some of the criminal work that must actually occur. So I thought that the president wanted to, as the evidence leader, so deftly put it, to say, you can't just simply shut the door on history. South Africans here had their money stolen. And then the last question, which I thought was poignant from the Deputy Chief Justice, do you not believe there needs to be an electoral reform? Which is what we've been advocating for, to say, even at best, let's get a direct election of the president, because I can recall all the motions of no confidence against President Zuma, where President Ramaphosa, Deputy President Ramaphosa, was a strong proponent of making sure that he voted in defense of President Zuma, despite what was going on and the evidence that was led. It tells you that there's a flaw in our electoral system, and I would expect him as a leader who wants to see it's not just renewal so that the ANC can get back to what it does best. It must be reformation so that the country itself can be stabilized to a point where no one else can ever repeat state capture going forward.
Prince Mashele, I mean, this conversation around electoral reform comes up again and again and again. But if you look at the history of the sort of most popular politicians in South Africa, well, after 1994, it was obviously Nelson Mandela. He was president and leader of the ANC. Thabo Mbeki, a bit more complicated, but Jacob Zuma was very popular at one point. The chances are he would still have won an election for president.
Yeah, and this is where, by the way, I would differ with Mmusi. Many people are very simplistic about the question of electoral reform, to think that if you were to elect a president directly, it will solve all of South Africa's problems. It's actually not true. Let me give you a graphic example of a country where for the past more than 30 years, they have been electing a president directly. But this country now, as we speak, is a failed state. That country is called Zimbabwe. Mugabe was elected directly by the electorate of Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa succeeded, obviously, Mugabe. But look at Zimbabwe, where it is. So you can actually have a country where you elect a president directly. You can still end up with a mess. That's number one. Number two, even in the current political system, by the way, and I listened to Cyril Ramaphosa trying to justify that this system is good because it does not allow a situation like the US where Trump went mad and formulated a policy through Twitter. But here is the thing about the current system. It has protected rogues in the ANC in the name of collective decision making. So if you want to ask who is responsible for state capture in South Africa over the past 10 years or so, you will not get a clear answer. The ANC is going to say we are sorry as an organization. So they won't tell you it is Jacob Zuma or it is so and so because of the fact that the current electoral system, it protects the whole group. So it allows individuals wrongdoing and hide behind collectives. So the question, Stephen, is not as simplistic as that. You can have rogues in a direct presidential system. You can have rogues like Jacob Zuma in a proportional representation system. What would solve South Africa's problems is this, in my view. It's political culture. Our political culture needs to be repaired. It doesn't matter what kind of system you adopt. If we have citizens who actually see no problem in electing rogues, just as it was the case in Zimbabwe for many years, you can still have the kind of situation that we have in South Africa.
Prince Mashele, thank you very much indeed. Mmusi Maimane still with us at the moment from the One South Africa movement. Mmusi, I'm not entirely done with the CR17 accounts. I don't think that you are either, if I may say. I don't want to be presumptuous. But the president said today that he did not believe the amount was as much as R1 billion, which has been claimed. He said it was closer to 300 million. Do you accept that figure of 300 million? And of course, you know, we mustn't forget there was more than one candidate at Nasrec, and it seems fairly likely that that money would have been spent by the other candidates.
Well, it's quite anomalous to say you didn't get involved with the finances, but you know what the cap was. And that secondly, that when we reflect on the kind of amount that historically have been placed in order to be able to secure an ANC conference, that 300 million rands is not enough. Now, I say this having run elections for a political party at a national level, that our budget for a national campaign with all the T-shirts, posters, all of that sort of stuff, was nearer to the 350, 400 million rands amount. So, and that was to deal with all the citizens that vote. To have to spend the same amount for an internal conference of 4,000 delegates and then seek to tell me that it was for T-shirts is also a stretch in the context of the body politics. It is common cause that we know that delegates, some delegates actually require a degree of bribery to be able to secure particular votes. So I find that what the president is saying is glossing over some very serious fundamental issues, and yet on another level is pursuing a court matter where he's trying to seek out to say, how do we preserve and contain the anonymity of the donors. The other issue is when it comes to the specific transaction with Bosasa, I can recall that in fact Arthur Fraser was moved from the position that he was at post the report to go to Director General of Correctional Services, which is core to Bosasa's business. And yet he, as a sitting president, came in, and that was one of the first acts that the president does. Now, I'm not suggesting that this was compensation for the funding, but it certainly does look coincidental that here's an organization funds you, you take a character who's been found against in a report, and then immediately move them to the very place that directs funding to a political party and your personal campaign. This is the sort of so when we talk about state capture, we must recognize that it's not just about the deployment of people to public service. It's also about those people being able to adjudicate contracts to particular companies that are already infiltrated by ANC's factional culture.
Mmusi Maimane, Prince Mashele, really do appreciate the time tonight on The Pulse. Thank you very much indeed.